and welcome back to Doodles MD. I'm Falake Lawal, your host, and I'm your public health, infectious disease, and internal medicine physician on Doodles MD, where you get medical information in simple, relatable, and applicable form. This week, in trying to wrap up the immune and hematologic system, this week we're going to be talking about the hemopoietic cells, which are the blood cells. Okay, so you're going to go on a ride with me. We've talked about some cells, particularly the ones that are involved with the immunity, and today we'll talk about the rest of them. Stay with me. So in talking about the blood cells, we have three main groups. We have the red cells, we have the white cells, and we have the platelets. All of these cells, if you remember back in one of the previous episodes, is they all come from what we call a hematopoietic stem cell, which is a blood deriving stem cell. There's different types of stem cells in the body, and these ones form blood cells. So they all come from that one stem cell and divide into all these cells that are in the blood for immunity, for oxygenation, for everything, right? And these cells form about 45% of the blood volume, and 55% of it is the liquid or the fluid part that we call the plasma. The plasma has, a lot of proteins, clotting factors, water, and all sorts of enzymes and chemicals in it. And so now, first up is the red blood cell. So the red blood cells, why do they call them red blood cells? Because they appear red. These cells primarily they come from the bone marrow in adults. When children are in the womb, they're made in the bone marrow, but also in the spleen, and they transition out of the spleen solely into the bone marrow of the long bones, and we call that the red marrow, right? Now, these red cells primarily function to carry oxygen. Honestly, they carry oxygen, from the lungs all through the body into the cells to provide oxygen for cell function, metabolism, chemical reactions. Oxygen is life. And then they carry carbon dioxide out of the cells through the blood up, usually into the lungs, and we exhale it. Of course, that can also be converted in chemical form, and it goes out through the urine. The other thing is that in adults, how much red cells do we make? We make about 2.4 million red blood cells every second. Now, you're wondering, if we make about 2 million every second, how much do you make in a day? How much do you make like in a whole month? And how much is actually in your body? A drop of blood is about 50 cubic meters, one drop of blood. That's one drop of blood. Now, in 1 cubic meter of blood, you have about 4 to 5 million cells. So, like, it's less than a drop of blood. If you divide a drop of blood into like 50 or something, you have about 5 million cells. That is how tiny and microscopic they are, and that is how much we have in our body. A red blood cell lasts about, from when it's released into the blood, it lasts about 100, average of 120 days, so 3 months. 3 months, it does its job, and then it's removed by the spleen. Remember, we talked about how the spleen, it's important. It's part of the lymphatic system, a lymphatic organ. It works for immunity, but it also works to remove old red blood cell, processes them through a stepwise process. So people who don't have their spleens, or their spleens are not functioning, have a bunch of other problems. Okay, so that is kind of just a little bit about the red blood cell. We talked about why they are red. They are red because they have what we call heme inside them, or hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is a protein that has iron inside it, and that is necessary for carrying the oxygen. That is important. So when your iron is low, your hemoglobin levels are low, you can't carry enough oxygen because you don't have enough hemoglobin inside the cell. Also, one thing about the red blood cell is that their shape, they are able to maneuver and squeeze through small spaces, so it's kind of like rubber. I don't want to say rubbery, but basically it can change shape. Okay, and certain abnormalities of the protein, of the hemoglobin, makes it such that it cannot squeeze through or change, positions, change shape, like in sickle cell disease, either SS, SC, any of the S or C genes makes it such that the cell now has like a pointy form because of what is inside it, and it's not able to maneuver through small spaces, so they get trapped. When they get trapped, they can cause blockage, and blockage can now cause problems where oxygen is not going forward, nutrients are not going forward, what is forward dies off, and things are backing up in the back, and all sorts of things happen. Okay, next up is white blood cells. All right. So white blood cells, these are mainly the cells of the immune system. Okay, they are also derived from the multiple potential stem cells, but the hematopoietic type, which is the ones that are destined for blood cells. And we talked about like the lymphocytes when we're talking mainly about the immunity. We mentioned a little bit extensively about the lymphocytes, but we also have other cells. And these white cells are found, of course, all throughout the body, not just in the blood. You have them in the blood, you have them in the lymphatic system, and then you have them in, some cells or some parts of the body, some tissue, depending, like, in a certain area of the brain, we call the blood-brain barrier. We have them in certain areas of the lungs, of the bowel, and stuff like that, where they serve as a protective layer. Now, to be able to distinguish white cells, we have a division that is based on, like, when you look at them, what they look like, but what makes them look like that is that some have what we call granules and some don't have granules. So granules are basically like tiny ball-like things that are inside the cell, but they carry chemicals. And each different group carries like different chemicals and they do different things. Like, and then the ones that have no granules, they don't have the dot like appearance. So the granulocytes have granules. We have like basophils, we have eosinophils, we have neutrophils. Okay, and then the ones that are not granulocytes are the lymphocytes and monocytes. The lymphocytes, we talked about the T and the B cells. The monocytes are precursors that become the macrophages, which are like the really big swallowing cells that opsonize and eat up bad stuff. In looking at the granulocytes, and that, we have like the basophils, we have the eosinophils. These are cells where what they carry in them, for instance, like the eosinophils react to parasites. The basophils react to a lot of allergens. So they carry things like histamine. And so when they get triggered, they release histamine, and you have these histaminergic reactions. And that's why maybe when you have an allergy, you take an antihistamine. That's why sometimes immediately you walk into a room, you start sneezing, your nose gets stuffy, all these things start happening because those cells already pre-carry those chemicals. They just need to get triggered and and just release everything. Okay, neutrophils, for instance, what they carry inside them are enzymes that digest, right? Things like myeloperoxidase. Some of us have heard like peroxidase. Yeah, these ones, like, they lyse, they cut, they destroy or break down things, and that's how they are able to destroy bacteria when they swallow them. Okay, so that's basically the division for white cells, the granulocytes and the agranulocytes. We've talked extensively a lot about the lymphocytes that are in the agranulocytes, but all of them work together in different capacity to serve the immune system. You can have too much, too little. You can have cancers of them. You can have other abnormalities of them where they're not working. And we will go through all of this, later. And in terms of having too much, too little in particular, when you have infections, generally people expect that you have a lot of them, which we call leukocytosis. Leuko is for white cells. Cytosis is just excess cells. And then leukopenia. Penia is the word we use for when something is just not enough or you have a low amount of it. And sometimes, rarely, when people have infections, you have leukopenia because it's just low. That's how their body reacts to it. In diseases like HIV, we tend to have leukopenia and things like that. So we'll talk more extensively about those. Next up is the platelets. Okay? Platelets. So these ones are also from the multipotent hematopoietic stem cell. They are small, irregular shaped cells. They are transparent-ish. And they are very small, about 2 to 3 micrometer in diameter. Like I said, they are irregular, but these are funny because they're not formed from, like, one cell just doesn't divide to form them. One cell divides, it forms what we call a mega big karyocyte. When that mega karyocyte matures, it now breaks up, fragments into tiny pieces, millions of pieces that break off from it to become platelets. What do platelets do? But before we talk about what they do, a platelet lasts about 5 to 9 days. These guys don't stay long, right? And they're always circulating around the blood. They're fixing things, patching things up. That's what they do. They serve as a source of natural growth factors. There's a lot of growth factors. They stimulate blood cells. They stimulate this, they stimulate other cells to grow. So they produce a lot of growth factors that enable things to either grow, especially in repair. And we'll get to that. Now, one big function, the big function that they are mostly known for is what we call hemostasis. Remember when we talked about heme, like, in relation to blood? Heme is blood. Hemostasis is just stabilizing blood. And it's basically in clot formation. So when you get a cut, when you get a scratch and you're bleeding a little from it, platelets are the ones that come there and quickly put a patch. It's like your natural bandage, your natural plaster that they put. They form thin fibers and quickly put it across that place, and then they allow the cells themselves, they produce something, the fibers stick on it. The platelets now serve as plug to plug the holes in between the fibers before. So that's what forms the first plug, because they are always circulating before your body now calls in other reinforcements to be able to now heal the place and close it up formally. Okay, so that is just going through the cells briefly in trying to talk about them. Red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets. Okay, and that's kind of it about them. So thank you for tuning in this week again as we wrap up our immune system and hematologic system. It's been a long journey, and I think I just decided to take my time on this just because, our immune system is very, very important and it's quite extensive. And I believe that, when you understand these things, it helps, just changes and shapes how we approach our immunity, our life and health and all of that. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you for staying with us. Before you sign off, the video ends, please subscribe to our channel if you haven't. Share the video with your family and friends. Send us your comments, your questions, what you'd like to hear next. Next week, of course, we're going to be talking about the musculoskeletal system, what holds us together, makes us stand, and all of that. And share the video with your friends. I already said that. Follow us on our social media handle. Until next week, I'm Falake Lawal on Doodles MD, signing out. Bye.